Hello everyone. For today's video, I would like to introduce my idea for another style of anvil, an anvil that I think will be useful for me when I make hammers. But before I get started, I want to give a really big shout out to two guys for their generous donations, and those guys would be Dennis Jacobs and Jerry S. Hodges. Thanks very much, guys. I wanted to just reiterate that, donating is not necessary, but it really does help me take time to make these videos. So really big thanks. So I've finally moved forward on my idea and taken the first step and had this made. So this is essentially my idea for that anvil, but I want to try this out first before spending more money on creating the anvil itself. I want to make sure that this idea is going to work. So, I purchased this steel, and this is just 1050, and the place I bought it from was it's kind of like a dungeon of steel. So I'll just show you a quick picture of that right here. That place has got steel strewn everywhere, and I found it interesting that they also were selling sections of railroad track, and that he said were also 1050 steel. And since this is a prototype, I'm just going to leave it as is. I'm not going to heat treat it, but I will just ease the edges some because they're very sharp. So I took this block to my machinist, and I had him mill in these shapes, and he used his computer mill to do this rather than a manual mill. And you can see that. I'll show a little clip of that right here. Again, this is just a prototype to help me determine if the radius on each of these will work the way I want. But the final anvil, my thoughts for the final anvil are that it'll have, this convex radius and then concave with the exact same radius but concave. And then on this end here, I was hoping to have it to be just flat. So the block will be, this is about 2.5 inches, 2.5, and then another 2.5 out to here of a flat. And then the height of the anvil being about the same as this, maybe about 8 inches, so that would weigh roughly about 90 pounds, I think. Still have to determine, front to back what would be suitable for this. So the machinist has told me that the way his equipment is set up and how he has to cut this, the mill's cut from the side and from one end or the other end, that he can't have, I can't have a flat on this side. He doesn't have the equipment that would be able to mill it like this. So I could ship that someplace else, but that would be really costly. So what we've come up with is, first I'll use this and then the flats of my regular anvils here. And then if that works, what we're going to have is maybe the flat on this side, but it'll be, lower than this. He'll mill that down some. And then so that should give him enough room to work from this side and then to create that shape and then have a flat here. So, if I want to use a flat surface on this anvil, that's also possible. So why this style of anvil? So when I make hammers, I always would like my hammers to have a little bit of downward curve. And that's very hard to achieve by hand hammering, and especially without deforming the eye that has already been created. So, before I made this myself, I just ground this out to make a, this concave depression. And then, towards the final heats, I would try to hammer my hammers down into that some, with the top facing downward so that it would create a little bit of a curve. But this is just a very gentle curve, and it really didn't do much, to be honest. So, I thought this more extreme curve would help. And also the main thing is because I can't physically complete this, I can't hand hammer and create that curve in such thick steel. So this is a hammer that I'm working on that it's about 3/4 of the way done, and the eye still needs to be drifted a lot more, and normally I drift from both sides, and then my final drift will be top down. So that expands the top of the eye will be just a little bit wider than the bottom. But anyway, the main point is I want this hammer to have just a little bit of curve this way. You know, this may be just aesthetic for such a short hammer, but for longer hammers it does have a purpose, because if a Japanese style hammer, or a hammer that has, you know, just one face in front, most of the material is in front of the handle, then that little bit of curve helps it to be level when you strike, because there's so much distance between the anvil face and the hammer. Typically that would be for a longer style Japanese hammer. Mine are shorter, but I feel that it does help some, and it just creates a really pleasing, a more natural aesthetic to the hammer, in my opinion. So this stock here is the tallest that I use, and it will be very hard to create any kind of curve. But I think with this, I'll be able to get just a slight amount of curve that would be pleasing to the eye, and also give that downward dropping effect that would help a little bit for when you're striking. So let's imagine a hammer is done to this point. You know, I've punched the eye, and now I need to expand that and to refine that. So at this stage of the hammer making, what I'll do is I'll start to use this, or the anvil once that's done. But like I said, I'll try this out first. So I've marked the top of this with my mark. So every time that I'm going to work it expand the eye from the top down, then I would have it on this, like such, on this concave surface. And then as I'm working, that slight pressure of each hammer blow will help to move this material downwards some. At least I hope. But like I said, it may be not much at the end of the day, but I think it should be enough that it will be noticeable. And then when I work it from the bottom, it'll be on this then. So to help maintain that curve, going like that, you know. So imagine this is the top, and then the curve is going like that. So, and I just think that would be really nice. I think it would make for a really fine hammer. It may not change the performance of the hammer that much, but like I said, I think aesthetically that would be very pleasing. And especially if it's in such a short piece, which would be very, very difficult for me to do. Let's say if I finish this hammer, the eye is complete, everything's is done, and I want to have that curve, well, I could try to create that curve in one or two final heats, you know, like such, hammering down on this, but I'm going to deform the eye then. So I think that it takes this is still quite a few heats away from being finished, you know, from drifting top and bottom, and then finally top. So I think there should be enough heats that it will lend it to have the kind of curve that I want. Okay, so I've eased the edges some, so it's ready to go. What I also wanted to say is that I'm just going to use this loose for now. You know, I'll just use this rubber mat beneath it to reduce friction so it doesn't jump around too much.
I meant to say
and then,
increase
friction.
friction.
Once I figure out an orientation that I like, maybe I'll have a hardy shank welded onto this. But for the time being, just use it loose. And then another thing is that I often have to apologize for the background noise. You know, every time I want to turn on this camera, it seems that buses and motorcycles and everything else are just whizzing by and get caught in the audio, and I just hope you guys can put up with that. I've tried everything, you know, to mitigate that, but you know, buying probably the top end camera and microphone, you know, it's just hard for me to reduce that. So just if you could put up with that background noise, I do appreciate it. And then one last thing is that I think this once this anvil is done, I think this would be very good beyond the hammers. I think this could serve purposes for different types of work, and I can especially see this this convex radius being very good for drawing out stock. So yeah, let me get started and see if I can put some curve into that hammer. so I cleaned up this hammer, and hopefully to let you see the amount of curve that's in it. I think, you know, not sure how visible it is, but there is a very, very slight droop in the direction that I want. And so I'll work on this to try to create even more droop. I think for my round hammers, that should be fairly easy and it'll be much more pronounced. But for my rectangular hammers, it's just because of the height and the shortness of this in comparison to the height, it's very hard to achieve that. Also in this hammer, because I've hammered this up a little bit here, these edges on the bottom, so it takes away from what would be a downward droop. And in addition, when I was trying to remove my my drift on the final heat, I always hammer the pole up here because that also creates more material for contact with the wood, and that little bit of a hump also takes away from what would be a gentle curve. You know, it curves and it comes up a little bit. So yeah, but it's, you know, this tool has achieved, I can see the potential and how it will achieve what I want for my hammers. And once I have this as an anvil entity unto itself with the flat shelf on this end, I think it's going to be very useful for me. So, and I think once this hammer is handled, maybe I'll show that, you know, in a few quick pictures or a quick clip at the end of this here. I think the way I curve my handle, that should help pronounce that even more. So, and one last thing is that I need to be careful because on my final drift there, the drift bottomed out and it left two pretty big dents in this. So being that this is not heat treated, got to be careful about that. So there's the finished hammer. And I think that the slight curve in the handle accentuates this slight curve in the hammer head, and maybe it's hard to see that, but it gives it kind of, like I said, that curved drooping appearance. So I'm going to definitely improve on how I go about doing this. But yeah, I'm pretty pleased with this first trial on this prototype. So I think that, you know, when I go to get the anvil done, I might change the radius just slightly on this. But otherwise, I feel like this is pretty good. And, you know, I was actually thinking too of another way to use this to get even more curve onto a hammer as thick as this. So, yeah, well, anyway, thanks a lot for watching this one, and I'll catch you guys next time.